On a rainy Atlanta morning, David Monroe, a powerful, poised logistics CEO, halts his sleek black sedan when he spots two lost twin boys standing alone at a crosswalk, drenched and holding a wrinkled piece of paper. Moms in hospital. When he gently asks their mother's name, one child answers with something that turns his world upside down. Rachel Adams. It's not just a name. It's her name. The woman he once loved and walked away from. What happens when past regrets find you in the faces of two little boys you've never met, but who look far too much like you? David's journey begins here. A story of second chances, fatherhood discovered late, and a man learning that some mistakes don't get erased, but can be redeemed. Don't miss this emotionally gripping story of love lost, family found, and promises finally kept. Subscribe now and follow more stories that stay with your heart long after they end. The morning rain had a soft, persistent rhythm as it slid down the windshield of David Monroe's black Range Rover, the kind of rain that made the world feel muted, like the universe itself had something heavy on its chest. David exhaled slowly, watching the mist collect in the distance. His assistant's voice droned through the speakerphone about postponed shipments and a delayed freight invoice from Chicago. But his mind was elsewhere, distracted in a way it hadn't been in years. He was a man used to motion, constant, deliberate, productive. At 50, David Monroe had conquered more than most ever dreamt of. CEO of a multi-million-dollar logistics firm, Monroe Freight, with headquarters spread across 5 cities, a penthouse overlooking downtown Atlanta, and more accolades than he had shelf space for. But this morning, none of that mattered. Not the meetings, not the margins. Something deeper stirred, an ache he couldn't name. So, when the light turned green and he saw them, 2 small figures standing just beyond the median under the narrow awning of a closed bus stop, David did something that would have shocked his entire boardroom. He pulled over. The boys couldn't have been more than 7, maybe 8. They were soaked, huddled close, shivering. One held a wrinkled paper bag to his chest, the other clutched a piece of notebook paper, barely legible under smudged ink. David stepped out, rain immediately spotting his coat. He approached cautiously, not wanting to scare them. "Hey," he said gently. "You two okay?" They flinched. The one holding the paper shielded his brother with a small protective arm. "Our mom. She's sick," he mumbled. David knelt down to eye level, his heart beating a little harder. "Is she here? In one of the buildings?" The boy shook his head and extended the paper. It was damp, barely holding its shape. In shaky child handwriting it read, "Mom's in hospital, please help." His breath caught. There was something hauntingly familiar about the older twin. The shape of his eyes, the tilt of his chin. David reached for the note, and when he turned it over, 2 words nearly knocked the air from his lungs. Rachel Adams. He stared at the name like it was a ghost come to life. "Where's your mom?" he asked, more urgently now. "She's in the hospital up the street. We walked here 'cause nobody came to pick us up." The younger one spoke up, his voice raspier, more afraid. "She's not waking up." David's throat tightened. Rachel Adams. That name hadn't passed his lips in over a decade, not since he ended things under pressure from his family. She'd been everything. Smart, stubborn, full of laughter, and too unsuitable for the Monroe name. The last time he'd seen her, she was crying in the rain on the porch of her tiny house, a suitcase at her feet. He remembered his own cruel words. He had no idea she'd had children, let alone his. The thought almost made him dizzy. "Come on," he said finally. "Let's get out of the rain first." They followed him hesitantly to the SUV. Once inside, he cranked the heat and handed them both bottles of water from the center console. They huddled close, their clothes soaked, shoes squishing against the floor mats. David drove them straight to the hospital, barely noticing the world outside. At the front desk, he explained the situation, and a nurse recognized the boys immediately. "You're here for Ms. Adams? She was brought in 2 days ago. Stroke, they think. She's in ICU. Are you family?" the nurse asked pointedly. David hesitated. The boys looked up at him expectantly, trustingly. "Yes," he said quietly. "I'm family." They were led down a sterile white hallway, the scent of antiseptic thick in the air. At the end, behind glass, Rachel lay motionless, tubes and monitors surrounding her like a cage. David pressed a hand to the window. The sight of her, older now, thinner, but still her, was a blow to the gut. One of the boys slipped his hand into David's. "She's gonna wake up, right?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. David knelt down and looked at both of them, really looked. "What are your names?" he asked. "I'm Liam. He's Lucas," said the first boy, confidently, Lemon Lucas. David swallowed hard. He could see himself in both of them, his jawline, his stormy gray eyes. He didn't know what would happen next, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He wasn't going to walk away this time. David Monroe had stood in boardrooms and negotiated billion-dollar contracts, but never had he felt more unsure of what to do than in the waiting room of that hospital, flanked by 2 small boys who carried his blood and didn't know it. The ICU nurse had told them Rachel was in a coma, stable but unconscious. No one knew when or if she would wake. The words had echoed through David's chest like gunfire, shattering pieces of guilt he'd buried for years. The boys sat beside him on the stiff hospital bench, their little bodies curled into the oversized jackets someone had given them. Lucas, the more restless of the two, swung his legs off the edge of the seat, while Liam clutched David's phone, scrolling through photos of dogs. David watched them both closely, studying the way they interacted. Lucas leaned into Liam naturally, instinctively, as if Liam had always been his anchor. Liam, in turn, moved with a quiet protectiveness David couldn't help but recognize. It was something he'd once seen in Rachel, a fierce calm, a steadiness beneath the chaos. He cleared his throat gently. "Have you two eaten anything today?" Lucas shrugged. "We had some crackers yesterday." "From the vending machine," Liam added, as if that somehow improved the situation. David felt the twist of something sharp and painful deep in his chest. He stood. "Okay, let's fix that." The boys followed him down to the hospital cafeteria, wide-eyed but obedient. David bought them grilled cheese sandwiches, apple slices, and chocolate milk, watching in stunned silence as they devoured everything in minutes. He pushed a napkin toward Lucas, who had ketchup on his cheek, and the boy made a face but wiped it off dutifully. "I'm not gonna lie," Lucas said through a mouthful. "This is way better than vending machine crackers." David cracked a small smile. "I would hope so." When they were done, they walked slowly back to the ICU waiting area. David's mind was racing, not with business plans, but with questions. What had Rachel gone through? Why hadn't she told him? Had she ever tried? And, more pressingly, what was he supposed to do now? He found a quiet alcove, pulled out his phone, and made a call. "Carol, it's me," he said when his assistant answered. "Clear my schedule." "Everything." There was a pause. "Sir, but the China Logistics Conference, postpone it, indefinitely, and call Sandra at HR. I need someone to help me find emergency childcare options, and some essentials." "Childcare?" Carol repeated, confused. "I'll explain later." He hung up and rubbed his face with both hands. He hadn't had children. He had never wanted to, or so he'd told himself for decades. But now, with Liam and Lucas watching him from the bench with those same storm cloud eyes he saw in the mirror every morning, David felt the deepest, most unexpected instinct bloom inside him. Protect them. "You don't know how," a voice in his head reminded him bitterly. He walked over to them, hands in his coat pockets. "How about you two come home with me? Just for tonight. We'll figure out what to do next tomorrow." Liam looked hesitant. Lucas, however, leaned forward. "Your house got a TV?" David blinked. Yeah. A big one." "Okay." Lucas nodded seriously. "But we get to pick what we watch." A small, reluctant grin pulled at David's mouth. "Deal." That night, he brought them into the place that had always felt more like a showroom than a home. The penthouse was clean, cold, and quiet. A place of efficiency, not family. The boys stepped inside and stopped in their tracks, their eyes scanning the vastness of marble and glass. Lucas whispered, "Whoa." David watched as Liam quietly slipped off his shoes and placed them neatly by the door. Rachel had taught them manners, even through all the hardship. The thought both comforted and gutted him. "I've only got one guest room set up," David said slowly. "You can share the bed for now. Tomorrow we'll get you your own things." Liam nodded. "We always share. Mom said that's how twins keep each other safe." David felt his throat tighten. "Your mom sounds really wise." "She is," Liam replied softly, "even when she's tired or scared." After dinner, which consisted of hastily ordered pizza on paper plates because David had no idea how to cook, they settled in front of the television. Lucas flipped through cartoons with delight. Liam leaned against the armrest, sleep already tugging at his eyelids. When the younger boy finally drifted off, David gently picked him up and carried him to the guest room. Liam followed behind, quiet and thoughtful. As David tucked the blanket around Lucas, he turned and found Liam standing beside him. "Is Mom gonna die?" Liam asked, his voice barely audible. David knelt down, his voice trembling. "I hope not, buddy. She's strong." Liam nodded slowly. "She used to say if we ever got lost, someone would come find us." David swallowed hard, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. She was right. David Monroe wasn't used to hospital waiting rooms. The sterile walls, the smell of disinfectant, the low hum of worried silence, none of it belonged in the world he'd built, where everything was scheduled, precise, and under control. But nothing about this morning had been ordinary. He sat across from the pediatric nurse's station, his phone silent in his lap, ignored. The twins, Liam and Lucas, sat to his right on a cracked vinyl bench, legs swinging over the edge, shoelaces undone, shirts damp from the rain. They were still quiet, their little bodies leaning into each other as if the closeness alone could shield them from what they'd just endured. David glanced at them, heart aching with a confusion he wasn't ready to name. One of them, Liam, he thought, clutched the folded paper again, its edges soft from overhandling. "Mom's in hospital," it read in shaky blue crayon. There was a phone number beneath it, written in a steadier adult hand. Rachel's hand. That same looping cursive from the letters he'd once tucked into his coat pocket, only to throw away unopened. Rachel. He hadn't spoken her name aloud in over a decade, but it pulsed in his mind now, a memory both welcome and unbearable. "I called the number," he murmured, breaking the silence. It went straight to voicemail. Neither boy responded. Lucas, the more fidgety one, kicked the toe of his shoe against the metal bench leg rhythmically. Liam just held the paper tighter. A nurse finally appeared from behind the frosted glass doors, her scrubs wrinkled, a clipboard in hand. "Mr. Monroe?" she asked, eyes scanning the room. David rose stiffly. "That's me." The nurse approached with practiced calm. "Rachel Adams was admitted 2 days ago. She had a stroke. Complications set in. She's stable now, but still unconscious. We were hoping family would come." David swallowed hard. "Can I see her?" She nodded gently. "Of course, but—" She glanced toward the boys. "They've been here a while. Security found them sitting outside the ER entrance early this morning. We didn't know where to place them. They wouldn't leave their mom's name or anyone to call." "I'll take responsibility," David said quickly, almost too quickly. They can come with me." The nurse hesitated. "Are you—" "Yes," he said, firmer this time. "I'm their father." The words echoed in his own ears, unfamiliar and jarring. Liam looked up at him then, with eyes so much like Rachel's it stole his breath. "Is Mommy gonna die?" David knelt to their level, hands resting on his knees. "No, buddy. She's fighting. And right now, she needs you two to be brave. Can you do that?" Lucas nodded hesitantly, tears brimming again. The nurse guided them down a corridor that felt much longer than it was. Each step was thick with the weight of what might be waiting behind that door. David had delivered pitches to billion-dollar clients with a calmer heart than the one hammering in his chest now. Room 314. He stepped inside, and everything else fell away. Rachel lay pale and still, her hair tucked beneath the hospital cap, an oxygen cannula trailing gently across her face. Machines beeped steadily, a haunting kind of rhythm. David's throat tightened. She looked so fragile, nothing like the vibrant, fierce woman who used to debate him about everything from dinner recipes to policy changes in City Hall. She'd always challenged him, always seen through the polished armor of his ambition. Liam took a shaky step forward. "She's sleeping?" "Yes," David whispered, "but she might hear us." Lucas clambered up beside the bed, reaching for her limp hand with fingers so small it undid David entirely. "Hi, Mommy," he said, voice trembling. "We found the man from the photo, the one you told us about. He helped us." David couldn't breathe. Rachel didn't stir, but something in the room changed. The weight shifted. Or maybe it was him. The nurse stepped outside to give them privacy. David moved to the other side of the bed, his hand hovering just above the rail. "Rachel," he whispered, "I don't know if you can hear me, but I'm here. I'm sorry it took this long. God, I'm so sorry." He looked across at the twins, her twins, his twins. "I didn't know," he choked. "I didn't know they existed." The only answer was the rhythmic beep of the monitors, but he didn't need a reply to feel how much he'd missed, how much time had slipped through his fingers like rain. He sat beside her, resting his hand on the cool blanket. "You should have told me," he murmured, "but I should have stayed. I should have fought harder, for you." Behind him, the boys curled into the visitor's chair, exhaustion finally overtaking them. David looked at them, then at Rachel, and though everything in him trembled, one thing became suddenly, achingly clear. He wasn't leaving this room alone. David sat, quietly, in the dimly lit hospital room, the rhythmic beeping of machines blending with the hum of fluorescent lights. Rachel lay still, her face pale against the starched white pillow, her features softened by sleep and sedation. The tubes and wires surrounding her were a harsh reminder of how fragile life had become. Liam and Lucas had fallen asleep in the corner, curled together like puppies in a pile of donated blankets. One clutched a battered stuffed tiger, the other still wore one untied sneaker. David had tried to read to them earlier, but his voice cracked halfway through and the words collapsed into silence. He hadn't moved for hours. A soft knock broke the quiet, followed by the nurse peeking in. "Mr. Monroe," she whispered, "visiting hours ended a while ago." David looked up slowly, then back at Rachel. "I'll leave soon." The nurse hesitated, then softened. "Take your time. We'll make an exception tonight." He nodded, grateful, and turned his gaze back to the woman he once believed he had let go. But the truth, the unspoken truth, was that he'd never really stopped loving Rachel. He had just buried it, deep and cold. His heart clenched as he recalled her voice earlier that day, barely more than a breath. "They're yours, David. I never got the chance to tell you." The weight of those words had cracked something open inside him. The walls he'd built, of pride, ambition, fear, had begun to crumble the moment those boys looked up at him and called her Mom. He stood and walked slowly toward the hospital bed, gently brushing a strand of hair from Rachel's forehead. Her face twitched slightly at his touch, a flicker of recognition, or maybe just the memory of it. "I'm so sorry, Rach," he murmured, the sound husky with emotion. "I was young, scared. I thought I was doing the right thing by walking away, but all I did was ruin the one thing that ever felt real." His voice broke. "And now I find out. We have sons." He looked over his shoulder at the sleeping boys, their chests rising and falling in perfect sync. A soft smile tugged at his lips, followed immediately by guilt. They were beautiful, strong, smart, brave, and for 8 years he'd been a ghost in their story. David leaned closer to Rachel, his lips almost brushing her ear. "I don't know how to fix this, but I'm going to try. I swear to you, I'm not walking away again." A hand gently touched his elbow. He turned to see Dr. Sandoval, the attending physician, standing quietly at his side. "She's stable for now," the doctor said gently, "but the stroke was severe. Recovery, if it comes, will be slow, unpredictable." David swallowed the knot in his throat. Will she understand? Remember, it's possible. It's also possible she won't, but patients surprise us all the time. David nodded and sat back down. The doctor gave his shoulder a firm, empathetic squeeze before leaving. Morning crept in slowly, bleeding light through the blinds. The twins stirred, groggy and confused. David greeted them with a warm, tired smile. "Morning, guys." Lucas rubbed his eyes and crawled into David's lap without hesitation. Liam sat up straighter, still guarded. "Is Mom gonna be okay?" David took a breath, choosing his words carefully. "She's fighting really hard. The doctors are doing everything they can, but she's resting now and that's good. Rest helps her heal." Lucas laid his head against David's chest. "Can we stay here?" "For now, yes," David answered softly. "But later today, I'm going to take you to my house for a little while, just to get some sleep in real beds, maybe eat something other than vending machine crackers." "Will we come back?" Liam asked pointedly. David nodded solemnly. "Of course. We'll come back every day." There was a long pause before Liam added, "Mom said she had a picture of you. She said you were someone important. Were you famous or something?" David chuckled softly. "Not famous, just someone who made a lot of mistakes and is trying to fix one of the biggest." Lucas tilted his head. "Like a superhero coming back?" "Something like that," David said with a sad smile, "only without the cape." That afternoon, he drove them back to his house, a sleek, glass-lined home that had never once felt like a home until today. As he unlocked the front door, a pang of worry gripped him. Would they hate it? Would it feel cold? But as Lucas ran straight to the kitchen shouting, "Do you have chocolate milk?" and Liam wandered the hallway in awe of the bookshelf filled with atlases and model ships, David realized the truth. He hadn't just found his sons. He had been given a second chance to be something more than successful. To be a father. And maybe, just maybe, to be forgiven. David stood motionless in the hallway outside Rachel's hospital room, a silence pulsing in his ears louder than the chatter of passing nurses and the occasional beep of distant monitors. The door behind him was heavy, as if weighed down by a decade of regrets. He had just walked out of the most painful conversation of his life, yet the only thing he could think about was the fragile way Rachel's fingers had curled when she whispered, "They're yours, David." The fluorescent lighting above him flickered once, faint, barely noticeable, but David noticed everything now, every detail, every word, every second he had lost. He turned slowly, walking back toward the waiting room where Liam and Lucas sat, their knees pulled to their chests, their identical eyes, his eyes, watching the floor like it might tell them what came next. When David stepped into the room, Liam looked up first. The boy didn't smile, he didn't speak, but he saw him. Lucas, sensing his brother shift, followed with a wary glance. Is Mom gonna be okay?" he asked quietly, his voice cracking like dry wood. David hesitated before kneeling beside them. "The doctors are doing everything they can," he said honestly, placing a hand gently on Lucas's back. "She's strong, and she's fighting hard." Liam's gaze sharpened. "You know her," he said. It wasn't a question, it was an accusation, a tremble beneath the surface of curiosity. "You called her Rage." David drew in a slow breath. "Yes," he said. "A long time ago, your mom and I were close." Lucas tilted his head. "Were you her boyfriend?" David gave a broken chuckle, one that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I was supposed to be more than that." The boys didn't respond. Instead, they stared at him with an unnerving intensity that made David feel more exposed than he had ever been in a boardroom. These weren't just children. They were the living proof of a life he had walked away from, one heartbeat at a time. A nurse stepped in, quietly announcing visiting hours were over. David nodded politely and turned back to the twins. "Listen," he said, his voice firmer now, more grounded. "I want to take you somewhere safe tonight, somewhere warm. You don't need to stay in a hospital lobby." Lucas looked hesitant. "But what if Mom wakes up?" David swallowed. "If she wakes up, I'll bring you back right away. I promise." Liam still didn't budge. "Why are you helping us? You don't even know us." David knelt lower so he was eye level. "That's not true," he said softly. "I may not have known your names, but I know you. I've seen you. Your mom's strength, your curiosity, your stubbornness. I see her in both of you. And I want to be here. For her. For you." Something passed between them then. A flicker of uncertainty meeting a glimmer of hope. The kind of moment that doesn't change everything right away, but opens the door for something new. That night, David drove the boys to his house in Brookhaven. His home was vast and modern, full of clean surfaces and untouched furniture. A cold kind of luxury. The moment they stepped in, Liam whispered, "It smells like new shoes." Lucas laughed unexpectedly, the sound catching even him off guard. David smiled weakly and motioned toward the kitchen. "You hungry?" he asked. The boys nodded almost in sync. David opened the fridge and realized he had no idea what kids like to eat. Everything inside was catered for a man who lived alone. Protein shakes, salmon, organic greens. No cereal, no juice boxes, no snacks. He ordered pizza instead. "Extra cheese and pepperoni," he said, trying to sound like he'd done this before. The boys sat on stools at the kitchen island, watching him with a mix of awe and amusement as he fumbled with paper plates. "I haven't had pizza from a box since college," David admitted. "Used to eat it during all-nighters, back when I thought missing sleep made you more successful." Lucas kicked his legs under the stool. "Does it?" David looked up, catching the boy's curious expression. "No," he said softly. "Turns out, it just makes you miss things." Later that night, after brushing their teeth with brand-new toothbrushes still sealed in plastic, the boys curled up on the guest-room beds David had hastily made with fresh linens. As he turned to leave, Lucas called out, "Hey, mister?" David paused at the door. "Yeah?" If she doesn't wake up, are you going to leave us?" The question sliced through him like glass. David turned around fully, walking back and kneeling beside the bed. "No," he whispered, his voice shaking. "No, I won't leave. Not this time." Liam sat up slightly, eyes narrowed. "Promise?" David didn't hesitate. "I promise." As he turned off the light and closed the door gently behind him, David felt the full weight of those words settle into his chest. For the first time in years, he was terrified, but this time, it wasn't about losing wealth or power. This time, it was about earning something that couldn't be bought, a place in the hearts of two boys who had every reason not to trust him. The morning came too soon. David stood in the hallway outside the guest room, listening. Soft breathing. No talking. No footsteps. Just the gentle hush of sleep. It was the first time the boys had spent a night in a real bed in weeks, maybe longer, and he didn't dare disturb that fragile peace. He wandered into the kitchen, poured himself a cup of coffee, and sat at the marble island with a legal pad in front of him. For 25 years, his mornings had been about meetings, emails, expansion plans, and board briefings. But today, his thoughts were elsewhere, on 2 little boys with matching eyes and a world of questions, and on a woman down the road in a hospital bed, hanging between breath and silence. Rachel. The ache in his chest deepened. What had she been through all these years? What had she sacrificed to raise his sons alone? The sound of feet padding against hardwood pulled him from his thoughts. Lucas appeared first, still rubbing sleep from his eyes, dragging the 2 long sleeves of a borrowed sweatshirt along the floor. He paused when he saw David, unsure. "Morning," David said gently. Lucas nodded. "Is it still okay if we're here?" David set down the pen. "Yes, this is your home for as long as you want it to be." Liam followed soon after, more reserved, his expression guarded as he scanned the room. "Mom?" David's voice softened. "No change yet. I called the hospital earlier." Liam nodded once, accepting the answer like it was another weight he was used to carrying. David got up and opened a cabinet, pulling out a box of pancake mix he wasn't entirely sure how to use. "I thought maybe we could try making breakfast. I don't know what I'm doing, but I figure 3 of us might be better than 1. Lucas grinned. "I like pancakes." Liam sat at the island, arms crossed. "We usually had cereal. Pancakes were for birthdays." David's chest tightened. He wished he could go back and give them all the birthdays he'd missed. "Well," he said, managing a smile, "maybe today's worth celebrating." The kitchen quickly filled with flour, batter, and more laughter than David had heard in his house in a decade. He flipped the first pancake too soon, splattering the pan, and Lucas nearly fell off his stool from laughing. "You're terrible at this," he squealed. "Terrible? I'm a beginner," David said, laughing too. "That was just a warm-up round." By the time the last golden pancake slid onto the plate, David felt like something real had shifted. Not just in the boys, but in him. He was learning their rhythms, their humor, their hesitations, and they were starting, slowly, to let him in. After breakfast, they visited Rachel again. The ICU felt colder that day. Rachel was still unresponsive, her pale face barely visible beneath the tubes and monitors. David sat between the boys, each of them holding one of Rachel's hands. Lucas leaned into her, whispering something David couldn't hear. Liam stared straight ahead. "Is she going to die?" he asked quietly. David closed his eyes. "I don't know," he said honestly, "but she's strong, and people have come back from worse." Lucas turned to him. "What happens if she doesn't?" David took a deep breath. "Then I'll be here for you, every day. I won't let you go through this alone." Lucas hesitated. "Even if it's forever?" David nodded, fighting back the emotion rising in his throat. "Even if it's forever." Back at the house that evening, as the boys drew on printer paper and David tried to make sense of emails he couldn't focus on, the doorbell rang. He opened it to find a man in a stiff suit and a gaze filled with contempt. The resemblance to Rachel was immediate, the sharp jawline, the eyes like stone. "You're David Monroe," the man said flatly. "Yes. I'm Eric Adams, Rachel's brother, and I want to know why my nephews are living in your house." David stood his ground. "Because their mother is in the hospital, because I'm their—" "Don't!" Eric snapped, his jaw tight. "You don't get to say that word. You left her. You abandoned her. Don't pretend now that you suddenly care." David's voice dropped. "I didn't know about them. If I had—" Eric stepped closer. Then that makes you a fool and a liar. Either way, I'm filing for guardianship." The words hit David like a punch to the chest. "Excuse me? You're not their father in any way that matters. No one's going to let some rich executive swoop in for a redemption story. I've been there. I've paid for groceries. I've held their hands while they cried for a mom who worked 3 jobs to keep them fed." David swallowed hard, his voice low. "And I respect that. But I'm not going anywhere, Eric. Not again." Eric's glare didn't waver. "We'll see what the court says." He turned and walked down the steps, leaving David staring at the door, breathless, the boys watching from behind the couch. "Who was that?" Liam asked, his voice trembling. David turned slowly, kneeling down. "That was your uncle, and he's going to try to take you away." Lucas clutched Liam's hand. "Will he win?" David looked into their frightened faces and said with more certainty than he had ever felt, "Not if I have anything to say about it." Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. But inside, a promise had been made, and this time David Monroe would not break it. The house was quiet after dinner, but it wasn't the comforting kind of quiet. It was heavy, the kind that settled into your bones and whispered all the things you weren't ready to say out loud. David stood at the sink, rinsing dishes he barely remembered serving. The boys had eaten in near silence, their eyes flickering between their plates and each other, saying everything in glances they didn't have the words for yet. And now, as the dishwasher hummed, he could hear them in the living room, the sound of crayon against paper and the occasional soft whisper echoing through the halls. He wiped his hands and walked in, heart aching at the sight of them. Liam was stretched out on the rug, coloring with quiet intensity. Lucas was curled in the corner of the couch, half asleep, holding a photo frame David hadn't seen in years, a picture of Rachel in college, back when her smile could light up every room she entered. David sat beside him slowly. "Where'd you find that?" Lucas looked up, eyes bleary. "It was in Mom's bag." David took the frame carefully, brushing his thumb across the glass. "That was taken the day she got her scholarship. She ran into my office shouting, said, 'I told you I'd get out of this town.'" Lucas leaned into him. "Do you think she'll get out of the hospital?" David didn't speak for a long moment. "I hope so, buddy. I really, really hope so." Lucas blinked up at him, lashes wet. "If she doesn't, will you send us away?" The question pierced David like a knife. He turned, fully facing him. "Lucas, look at me." The boy did, hesitantly. "I am never sending you away. I don't care what happens next. You and Liam are staying with me. Always." Lucas studied him, as if trying to believe something that went against everything he'd learned about trust. "Even if you're not very good at pancakes?" David chuckled softly. "Even then." They sat in silence for a few minutes, the kind that doesn't feel like emptiness, but like a kind of safety. From the floor, Liam spoke up suddenly. "You said you didn't know about us." David turned toward him. "That's right." Liam's brow furrowed. "But you knew Mom. You loved her?" David's throat tightened. "I did. I still do." "Then why'd you leave?" The room felt still, the weight of the question unbearable in its honesty. David leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "I was afraid. My family, my parents, they didn't approve of your mom. They thought she wasn't good enough because she didn't come from money, didn't have the right background." He said the word like it burned. "And I let them convince me they were right. I was a coward." Lucas looked up. "But we're here now. Does that mean you're not scared anymore?" David reached over and pulled both boys into his arms. "I'm still scared," he whispered honestly, "but I'm not running. Not this time." The doorbell rang, startling all 3 of them. David stood, confused. It was nearly 9 p.m. He opened the door to find a courier holding an envelope. "Mr. Monroe?" "Yes." "Legal notice. You've been served." The man handed it over without emotion and disappeared into the night. David stared at the envelope in his hand like it was about to explode. Back inside, the boys waited with wide eyes. "What is it?" Liam asked. David didn't answer immediately. He walked to the kitchen, opened the envelope with trembling fingers, and scanned the first line. "Petition for emergency guardianship. Eric Adams, v. David Monroe." He swallowed hard. Lucas stood by the doorway. "Is that bad?" David exhaled slowly. "It means your uncle. He's trying to take you away." Liam's face went pale. "Can he do that?" David kneeled, gripping their shoulders gently. "He can try, but I'm going to fight with everything I have to keep you here. I promise you that." Lucas suddenly wrapped his arms around David's neck, clutching him tightly. "Don't let them take us." David's arms closed around him instinctively, his voice breaking. I won't let anyone take you." Later that night, after the boys were asleep, Lucas curled against his pillow, Liam with the light still on because darkness wasn't something he'd learned to trust yet. David sat in his study, staring at the legal notice again. He picked up his phone and dialed the one person who had always gotten results, no matter how complex the case. "Jameson," came the gravelly voice on the other end. "It's David Monroe. I need help. Family court. Emergency guardianship hearing. I need to win. No excuses." There was a pause. "Tell me everything." And so he did. Every last detail. Because for the first time in a long time, David wasn't just fighting for business. He was fighting for family. And he was finally ready to do it right. The courtroom felt colder than David had imagined. Even the beige walls and polished oak benches couldn't warm the air of judgment that clung to every corner. Liam and Lucas weren't there, thankfully. They were at home with Maria, the family's longtime housekeeper who had stepped back into David's life without question when he called her in a panic. But David could feel their absence like an ache in his chest. Across the aisle sat Eric Adams, Rachel's older brother, built like a linebacker with a suit that didn't quite fit. His eyes, dark and accusing, never left David's face. There was no warmth, no family in that gaze, only challenge. The judge, a woman in her 60s with silver-streaked hair and tired eyes, called the room to order. "This hearing is to determine the guardianship of minors Liam and Lucas Adams in the light of their mother's current incapacitation. Mr. Adams, you've petitioned for emergency custody. Mr. Monroe, you're contesting that petition. Let's begin." Eric's lawyer stood first. "Your Honor, my client has a long-standing relationship with the boys. He's been involved in their lives since birth. Mr. Monroe, on the other hand, only learned of their existence weeks ago. He was absent during the mother's pregnancy, birth, and entire upbringing of the children. He has no parenting experience, no prior emotional bond, and, until recently, no willingness to take responsibility." David sat still, jaw clenched. The lawyer continued. "Furthermore, Mr. Monroe is a high-powered CEO with a known history of prioritizing work over personal obligations. His lifestyle is incompatible with the needs of 2 young boys recovering from trauma." When the judge nodded, inviting a response, David stood slowly, every movement deliberate. "Your Honor," he began, voice steady but deeply felt, "I won't argue with the facts. I wasn't there. I should have been. 10 years ago I walked away from the woman I loved because I was a coward. I believed lies. I let fear, my family's expectations, decide for me. And I never forgave myself." He paused, meeting the judge's gaze. "But I'm not here to make excuses. I'm here because Rachel, the boy's mother, trusted me. In the hospital, before she could speak more than a few words at a time, she told me something I'll never forget. She said, 'They're yours, David. I tried to tell you.' And I knew in that moment I had to change." He swallowed hard. "Since then, I've been learning how to be a father. I've burned pancakes, read bedtime stories out of order, tried to braid hair that wasn't even there just to make them laugh. I've answered hard questions about death, abandonment, and love. And every day, I've looked at those boys and thought, I can't lose them. Not again. The courtroom was still. David reached into his jacket and pulled out a worn leather journal. "This is Rachel's," he said gently, holding it up. "I didn't find it until last week, tucked inside a drawer in her hospital room. It's a diary, and the last entry is addressed to me." He unfolded the page, voice quiet. She wrote, "If you come back, and if you ever find this, please don't carry the guilt forever. I forgave you a long time ago. All I ask is that you forgive yourself. And if you're reading this, it means you're with them, our boys. Teach them how to be strong, not just successful, and love them like I did, with your whole heart." He lowered the page, voice thick. "I'm not trying to replace her. I couldn't. But I want to honor her, and I want to be the kind of father they deserve." The judge leaned back in her chair, hands folded. "Thank you, Mr. Monroe. I'll take both statements under advisement." The gavel struck gently to recess the hearing, but it echoed in David's chest like a gunshot. Outside the courtroom, he exhaled deeply, his shoulders finally sagging. Eric approached quietly. "That diary," he said gruffly. "I didn't know she wrote anything like that." David nodded, surprised. "She hid a lot of pain." Eric's jaw tensed. "I still don't trust you, but I saw how Lucas clung to your hand when you brought them in for school orientation. I saw how they look at you. Maybe they're already choosing." David didn't smile. He didn't have it in him. "Then maybe we both need to do what's best for them, not what makes us feel vindicated." Eric gave a curt nod, then turned and walked away. Back at the house that evening, Liam and Lucas ran to the door as David stepped in. Liam threw his arms around him, while Lucas clutched a handmade card. "We made this for Mom," he said softly, "but you can read it too." David crouched, taking the card with trembling hands. Inside, in messy crayon handwriting, were the words, "We miss you, but we're brave. Dad says brave means loving even when it hurts." David couldn't speak. He pulled them both close, holding on like he'd never let go. The judge's ruling would come soon. But in this moment, in the warmth of their arms and the weight of their faith in him, David already knew what he was fighting for. And he would never stop. The ruling came on a Tuesday afternoon. David sat on the edge of the sofa, a mug of untouched coffee cooling in his hands. Across from him, Liam and Lucas were sprawled on the floor, working quietly on a puzzle they insisted on finishing before dinner. Their heads bent together in concentration, the scene so peaceful it hurt. His phone buzzed once. The judge's office. David stood slowly, glancing at Maria, who nodded and moved toward the boys. He stepped out into the hallway and answered. "This is David Monroe." "Mr. Monroe." The clerk's voice was calm but efficient. "Judge Ellison has finalized the guardianship ruling. You've been granted sole custody of Liam and Lucas Adams, effective immediately." David leaned against the wall, knees momentarily weak. "Thank you," he whispered hoarsely. He ended the call and closed his eyes, the weight of weeks of uncertainty lifting, but in its place came something deeper, a new kind of responsibility, a vow sealed in legal terms but rooted in the unspoken promise he'd already made. He re-entered the living room. Liam looked up, puzzled. "What's wrong?" David crouched beside them, pulling both boys close. "Nothing's wrong," he said softly. "Everything's right. You're home, and you're staying." Lucas blinked. "Like, forever?" "Yeah," David replied, tears stinging his eyes. "Forever." Liam hugged him tightly, whispering, "Mom would be happy." David nodded, unable to speak. The following weeks passed in a blur of adjustment. David moved his home office downstairs closer to the kitchen and the chaos of daily life. The house echoed less now, filled with the sounds of laughter, arguing over cereal, and questions that ranged from, "Why is the sky blue?" to, "Do you think Mom's still watching us?" He kept Rachel's diary beside his bed, reading entries late at night when sleep eluded him. Her words weren't just memories. They were maps. Maps of how she'd loved, how she'd struggled, how fiercely she'd believed in the future she hoped he'd someday share. One evening, as Liam practiced spelling and Lucas meticulously arranged his toy trucks in rainbow order, David opened a new drawer in the hallway closet and pulled out 2 folded pieces of paper. He returned to the living room. "Hey, guys, I have something for you." They looked up, curious. David handed each of them a sheet. "These are your adoption certificates. I know I didn't get to be there from the start, but now I get to be here for the rest." Lucas scanned his name, then grinned. "I'm a Monroe?" "You both are," David said, voice catching. "If that's what you want." Liam nodded solemnly. "We do." Later that night, after bedtime stories and impromptu pillow fights, David tucked them in. Lucas reached for his hand. "You know what I miss most?" the boy whispered. "What?" "When Mom used to sing to us, especially when we were scared." David swallowed hard. "Do you remember the song?" Lucas nodded. "I'll learn it," David promised. He sat in the dim hallway afterward, eyes closed, head tilted against the wall. Rachel's voice echoed in his memory, soft and warm. He would learn that song. He'd learn whatever they needed. 2 days later, a surprise arrived. Unexpected, but not unwelcome. Maria entered his office, holding a letter. "It's from Rachel's lawyer. Postmarked the week she was admitted to the hospital. Looks like she wrote it for the boys, in case." David took the envelope carefully and opened it. Inside were 2 smaller notes, labeled with their names in Rachel's looping handwriting. He called the boys into the kitchen and laid the notes on the table. "She wrote these for you," he explained gently. The boys sat, quiet and reverent. They opened their letters. Lucas's voice wavered as he read aloud. "Dear Lucas, if you're reading this, it means I'm not there to say I love you, so I'm saying it here. Every day, every moment, I loved you, and I still do. Be kind, be silly. Never forget your heart is your superpower." Liam read silently, tears gathering in his eyes. David waited. Finally, Liam whispered, "She said, be brave. Let love in, even when it feels like it might hurt, because love is what makes you strong." David wrapped them both in his arms. "Your mom was the bravest person I've ever known." Liam's voice was barely audible. "You're kind of brave now too, you know." That night, as they fell asleep, David sat by the window. The city lights flickered in the distance, but his gaze was turned inward, to memory, to gratitude, to resolve. He'd failed once, walked away from someone who had offered him everything, but this time he hadn't run. He had stayed. He was still learning, still fumbling through breakfast burns and science projects and bedtime songs, but his heart, long frozen, was alive again, and beating for 2 little boys who had given him a second chance at family, and for the woman whose absence had taught him how to finally be present. Rachel passed away on a Friday morning just after sunrise. David was holding her hand when it happened, her fingers curled loosely in his, her breath already shallow, whispering against the hum of hospital monitors. The boys were still asleep in the waiting room, curled under donated fleece blankets. He'd told the nurses to let them rest. He knew somehow Rachel had waited for him. Her eyelids fluttered once. Then slowly she turned her head, looking at him not with fear, but with an exhausted peace. "You came back," she whispered, barely audible. "I never should have left," David said, tears streaming down his cheeks. "I'm so sorry, Rachel." She smiled weakly, her voice now just a thread. "This time, you chose right." David bent forward, pressing his lips gently to her forehead. "I'll take care of them. Always." Rachel gave the softest nod. Then the line on the monitor flattened into a long, mournful tone. And she was gone. The world grew silent in a way David had never experienced. It wasn't the absence of noise. It was the collapse of something inside him, like a cathedral crumbling inward, hollowing out a place that used to echo with regret and now held only sorrow and resolve. He sat by her side for what felt like an eternity, the warmth in her hand fading gradually. A nurse finally stepped in, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "I'll let you say goodbye," she said softly. David couldn't respond. His throat was too tight, his heart too shattered. But when he stood and walked out to the waiting area where Liam and Lucas were still asleep, something inside him shifted. He looked at the boys, innocent, unknowing, wrapped in dreams, and he realized he could not fall apart, not now, not yet. He knelt beside them as they stirred. "Is Mom awake?" Lucas asked, rubbing his eyes. David took a slow breath. "No, buddy," he said, his voice trembling. "She's not." Liam sat up, sensing the truth immediately. Is she with the stars now?" David nodded. "Yeah, she is. She's with the stars, and she's watching over you, always." Lucas leaned into him and began to cry softly. David pulled both boys into his arms, letting them sob into his shirt while he whispered, "She loved you more than anything, and so do I." The funeral was small, intimate, held on a quiet hillside Rachel had once described as peaceful, like her soul could breathe there. David made sure every detail felt personal. The pastor read from Rachel's journal, passages David had marked. Friends and former co-workers from the hospital came, bringing stories about her kindness, her work ethic, the way she remembered everyone's birthdays without fail. But it was the boys who stole everyone's hearts. At the end of the service, Liam stood beside his brother, holding a drawing they had made, a poster that said, "Our family, Mom in the sky, Liam, Lucas, and Dad down here." David didn't correct them. He couldn't, because in that moment, they were right. And in that moment, Rachel wasn't gone. Not completely. She lived in their eyes, in the way Lucas smiled, in the way Liam asked questions too big for his age. She was there, in every breath David took, reminding him what love really meant. In the weeks that followed, David changed his life completely. He turned down the promotion that would have required international travel. He transferred his office to a home-based role. His schedule revolved around school pickups, lunches packed with too many snacks, and afternoon soccer practice. He wasn't perfect. He burned toast. He forgot where the laundry baskets were. But every night, when the boys curled up beside him for story time, always insisting on the same battered book Rachel used to read, he felt whole in a way he never had before. He took them to the library, taught them how to build Lego cities and how to tape their favorite superhero drawings onto the fridge. He learned how to braid Lucas's hair when he asked, like Mom used to do it. He even joined the PTA, much to the shock of every other parent there. And every Sunday, they visited the hillside. The boys would lay new flowers, and David would sit silently, sometimes reading aloud from Rachel's journal. One afternoon, Lucas asked, "Do you think Mom knows you're doing all this for us?" David looked out across the trees, sunlight flickering through the leaves. "I think she does. I think she always believed I'd come back." Liam took his hand. "We believe it too." As they walked back to the car, David looked up at the sky, remembering Rachel's final words. "This time, you chose right." Yes, he had. And now, with every lunchbox packed, every bedtime story whispered, and every hug held a little longer than needed, David was finally becoming the man Rachel had seen in him all along. The man who would never walk away again. The court hearing for custody felt more nerve-wracking than any investor meeting David Monroe had ever faced. This wasn't about numbers. This was about family. Two young boys who had lost their mother and might now lose the man they were just beginning to call Dad. David arrived in a Navy suit, understated and clean, with Liam and Lucas holding each of his hands. He could feel their small fingers tighten as they approached the courthouse steps. His heart ached at how solemn they looked in their little dress shirts, trying to be brave. "You okay, guys?" he asked softly. Lucas nodded quickly, but Liam whispered, "What if they take us away?" David knelt, eye level. "No matter what happens today, I will fight for you. I promise." Inside, the courtroom buzzed with quiet tension. Rachel's older brother, Martin Adams, sat across from them with a stern expression. He was dressed sharply, his silver hair combed to perfection, his wife perched beside him like an unmoving statue. They hadn't been around when Rachel was sick, but now, here they were, arguing David was unfit. "He abandoned Rachel before they were born," Martin told the judge. "He never showed up until she was dying. That's not a father, it's a ghost who came back too late." David listened, jaw tight, each accusation cutting deeper. He wanted to respond. He wanted to shout, "I didn't know!" But he knew anger wouldn't win this. When his turn came, he stood slowly, adjusting the folded letter he carried in his coat pocket. His voice was calm, but full of weight. "Your Honor, I made the worst decision of my life when I let someone else's opinion dictate my future with Rachel. I walked away, and I regret it every single day." He turned to face Martin, then the judge again. "But I didn't walk away from Liam and Lucas. I never knew they existed until the day I found them on a rainy sidewalk, lost, scared, carrying a note saying their mother was in the hospital. I brought them in, I stayed. I've read bedtime stories, made lunches, bad ones admittedly, helped with homework, and held them when they cried for their mom." He swallowed hard. "I love them, and not because I have to, but because I want to, because they're part of her, and they're part of me." The judge listened without expression. Then David pulled out the letter Rachel had written, but never mailed. He unfolded it slowly, his hands shaking. "She wrote this during her hospital stay. I didn't find it until after her death." He read aloud, voice trembling. "David, if you're reading this, I hope it means you found them, our boys. I hope you saw what I always believed, that you could be a father, a good one. I forgave you a long time ago, and I hope one day you'll forgive yourself too. If you're back, really back, raise them with your whole heart. That's all I ever wanted." Silence hung in the courtroom like mist. David looked up, his voice quieter now. "I'm not perfect, but I won't fail them. Not again." The judge leaned back, steepling her fingers thoughtfully. She reviewed the file, glancing at the boys who sat quietly with their hands clasped together on their laps. "Mr. Monroe," she said slowly, "this court takes custody seriously, but love, stability, and commitment, these are not measured by timelines alone." She paused, then continued. "I find that granting you full guardianship is in the best interest of Liam and Lucas. You may continue to care for them as their legal father." A soft gasp escaped Lucas. Liam blinked, then turned to David. "Does that mean—" David could barely speak through the lump in his throat. He nodded slowly. "Yeah. It means we're going home. Together." From the bench, even the judge's eyes glistened slightly. Outside, as they exited into the crisp afternoon air, the boys clung to his sides. Reporters had caught wind of the story, but David ignored the cameras, shielding the boys from the flashes. Later that night, back home, Lucas was the one who pulled out the poster board. "We're making something," he declared, setting out crayons. "What kind of something?" David asked, rolling up his sleeves. Our new family poster, Liam explained. The boys worked for an hour, whispering, laughing, occasionally bickering over which color to use. When they finished, they taped it proudly to the fridge. It read, in crooked handwriting, "Our family. Dad, Liam, Lucas, and Mom, watching from the sky." David stood back, speechless. Lucas looked up at him. "Do you like it?" David knelt, gently placing a hand over his heart. "Love it." He didn't have the right words, but he didn't need them. That night, after the boys were asleep, David walked out onto the porch and looked up at the stars. He raised a glass of warm milk, no scotch, not tonight, and whispered, "You were right, Rachel. I came back, and I'm not going anywhere." The house had grown louder and warmer since Liam and Lucas arrived. Laughter echoed down the hallways where silence used to live. Crayon drawings lined the fridge, Lego cities sprawled across the living room rug, and David Monroe's once pristine calendar was now speckled with sticky notes: soccer game, parent night, library due date. His executive assistant had learned not to schedule anything past 4:00 p.m. David had more important meetings now: dinner, bath time, story hour. On the 1-month anniversary of the court ruling, David walked into the kitchen and found the twins sitting cross-legged at the table, whispering with suspicious grins. "What are you two plotting?" he asked playfully. Liam looked up with mock innocence. "Nothing." Lucas, unable to keep a secret, burst out, "We made you something." He held up a folded poster board. When David opened it, he found a hand-drawn blueprint, part crayon, part marker, with smudges where they'd erased and redrawn several times. Across the top, in bold purple letters, it read, "The Rachel Hope Center, for kids like us." David's breath caught. "We thought," Liam explained softly, "since we were lucky, maybe other kids should be too." Lucas added, "And maybe it could have bunk beds and cookies and books and a garden," and David pulled them into his arms before they could finish. "I think that's the best idea I've ever heard," he whispered, voice rough with emotion. That night, after tucking them in and promising to help build the world's coolest center, David sat in his study, staring at an empty notepad. But instead of opening a spreadsheet, he opened his heart. He wrote a letter to Rachel. "Dear Rachel, the boys are incredible. You were right. They're strong, kind, and too smart for me to keep up sometimes. Liam likes maps and planning everything. Lucas thinks bedtime is a suggestion, not a rule. I catch glimpses of you in both of them, your courage, your mischief, your heart." They made a poster today about a place they want to build to help other kids who need a safe home. They called it the Rachel Hope Center. I think you'd cry if you saw it. I did. I miss you, but I finally understand what you meant when you said to forgive myself. I have a long way to go, but I'm trying, and I'm staying. Forever. Thank you. For them. For everything. With love, always. David, he folded the letter, placed it in the small memory box the boys kept on the bookshelf, and shut the lid gently. Spring arrived in Atlanta with bursts of pink dogwood trees and sunshine that lingered just a little longer each evening. The boys adjusted to their new routine with the ease only children possess. David, however, transformed in subtler ways, learning how to braid a friendship bracelet, how to patch grass stains, how to sit with grief and joy at the same table. The groundbreaking ceremony for the Rachel Hope Center took place on a breezy Saturday afternoon. Community leaders, neighbors, and a few media outlets gathered around the cleared plot of land just 10 minutes from David's home. A modest podium stood beneath a canvas banner printed with Liam and Lucas's drawing. David stepped up to the mic, his sons flanking him, each gripping one of his hands tightly. "When I first met these two," he began, nodding to the twins, "I thought I was helping them. But the truth is, they saved me. They reminded me what love looks like when it's honest and pure and doesn't care about your resume or mistakes." He paused, voice thickening. "This center is for every child who's ever felt forgotten, and for every parent who wishes for one more chance to do better." He stepped aside, letting the boys help plant the first tree in what would one day be a thriving garden. Cameras clicked, applause rose, but for David, all that mattered were the little hands digging beside his and the faint breeze he could have sworn carried Rachel's laughter. Later that night, back home, Liam placed a new drawing on David's pillow. It showed the three of them standing in front of a tall building with a heart-shaped sign that read, "Hope." Above them was a fourth figure drawn in light blue. "She's always with us," Lucas said quietly from the doorway. David nodded, eyes full. "Yes, always." As he lay in bed that night, the boys asleep down the hall, David whispered to the dark, "I lost her once, but I won't lose what she left behind." And, for the first time in a long time, he slept peacefully, knowing that his second chance wasn't just redemption, it was purpose.